Blessings, good evening. We have a few questions have come in for today's session, so see what we have. First question is, each evening I chant the supreme praise of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, along with the video by Buddha Vajrayana Monastery. Or maybe you just did it just then. What wrong actions by body, speech or mind may I have committed towards the Buddha, the Dhamma or the Sangha? Thank you very much for your patience, kindness and generosity in sharing the Dhamma. If you're with us live tonight, well, you'll know that we just did chant the what we call the evening chanting in praise of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and each verse ends with a little section where we bow down and chant asking forgiveness from the Buddha for any sort of unrestrained action we may have done through body, speech or mind, and making our aspiration to be more restrained for the future, which is a kind of small ritual, you might say. You might look at this on two levels. There's the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, what we call the triple refuge. There's the historical Buddha, the person who's obviously passed away, or we say entered parinibbana, but no longer with us. There's the Dhamma, which is the truth, the teachings as contained in the Buddhist texts. And then there's the Sangha, both living and those who passed away. But on the more deeper level, the Buddha means these qualities that the Buddha embodies, the purity, the compassion, the wisdom that we aspire to develop in our own heart. The Dhamma is the truth, but the behavior that is supportive of seeing and having insight into the truth. And then the Sangha is those qualities that make a person, man or woman, into a noble one. So when we chant, we say, Supatipanno, Ujupatipanno, Nyaya Patipanno, Samichi Patipanno. Practicing in line with the Dhamma, practicing to develop insight for realization and so on. So it's the qualities of the Sangha. So on the deepest level, it's these more impersonal spiritual qualities that we aspire to and that we respect and hold dear. But on the more normal kind of personal level, there's still a relevance. Even if the Buddha has passed away, say, there's the memory of the Buddha as a teacher. Or Sangha is the same. You have the memory of Sangha and those Sangha teachers who we consider to be noble ones, who we have respect for, we value. Even if they passed away, we still honour their memory and recollect them. So then there's always a chance that through a moment of heedlessness or lack of mindfulness, through body, speech or mind, so on the level of actions or through speech or through thought, we may sometimes be disrespectful either to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha as in terms of persons, or maybe to the path of practice and the qualities that the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha embody, and sometimes we stray in our thinking and our views. We develop what we call wrong views, which are going against what the Buddha taught and against the truth and are not leading to the end of suffering. So one of the qualities the Buddha encouraged us to develop is humility. As we just chanted, say, in the Metta Sutta, the Buddha's words on loving kindness. Try to be humble, not conceited, not proud, not arrogant, because we're recognizing our starting point is we're born as unenlightened individuals and we still have greed, anger, delusion, what we call mental defilements affecting us. And they come up, and sometimes they come up as arrogance, conceit, and sometimes we can be full of anger, rage, greed, selfishness, and we can even take that out or express that towards Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And if people are honest, and people often do talk about this, they say sometimes they have a thought of anger or negativity towards the Buddha or his teachings, or the Sangha, maybe a particular Sangha member, a teacher. Sometimes practicing the Dhamma does this, brings up our own internal resistance or stubbornness. And so you may have a thought, why did the Buddha teach this? Or, why, say if you're a monk, you might sometimes, especially when you're new, you say, why did the Buddha make so many rules for the monks? And you sort of have your own internal complaint, protest. Or sometimes it's external. People verbalize it, or even sometimes physically do things to show their displeasure with the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Any Dhamma teacher, Sangha, the monk or nun who's a Dhamma teacher will almost certainly have encountered a student who occasionally, sometimes in certain situations, is not happy with what they've heard, what they've been taught. Even very great teachers who we believe have great, pure, enlightened minds, are wise, compassionate, such as Ajahn Chah. Sometimes people could be rude or disrespectful to him because of the strength of their own internal kilesa. And even the Buddha, people could be rude, disrespectful, say unkind, untrue things to the Buddha. So acknowledging that possibility, one recognizes that perhaps through a lack of mindfulness or lack of heedfulness, there may be those occasions when we do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing, or think the wrong thing towards Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Even if you can't remember anything, often, like when we do this chant, we just seek forgiveness and establish restraint from here onwards anyway, just in case. It's a very healthy, good practice, good habit to get into. Monks do this, say, with their teacher. From time to time we'll have a ceremony, a little ritual where we ask forgiveness from the teacher. Through body, speech or mind, anything I've done, any wrongdoing I've done, may the teacher forgive me. And the teacher says, I forgive you and you must forgive me. Even if there's nothing, it's a very good way to clear the air and just to make sure you are still respectful and appreciate your teacher, say. So this is a very good spiritual quality to cultivate humility, the quality of what we call hiri ottappa, which means sense of shame, fear of wrongdoing, to develop the reverence, what we call samma karawa, reverence for the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and respect for the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And these kind of chants and recollections help to maintain that. The way of the mental defilements based in ignorance, craving, attachment, it goes in the opposite way. We forget the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. We become angry. We become conceited, arrogant. Sometimes through delusion, we get lost in our moods and sometimes display them in inappropriate ways or just careless ways. Like when I was a young monk, we were always trained to respect anything that symbolized or pointed to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So like a Buddha statue you put up on a high place, you don't step over a Buddha statue. When you pick up a statue, you always put your hands in Anjali, even if you're just picking it up or dusting it. And you can say, well, the statue is just a statue. It's not a Buddha. It's just made of metal or wood or stone. But it represents those qualities, and you're inclining your mind to develop those qualities. You value those qualities. So when you put your hands like this, you're just reminding yourself in a physical way that you respect those qualities and you wish for those qualities and you value them. Or a Dhamma book. We were always taught you don't step over a Dhamma book, and you don't leave Dhamma books lying around like you might do, a magazine or newspaper or something. A Dhamma book, again, you might put in a safe place on a shelf or out of the way. You don't step over it. You don't put your cup of coffee on a Dhamma book, that kind of thing, because you respect the Dhamma as the vehicle that will bring you to Nibbana. So it's a kind of fusion between body, speech and mind, valuing Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, respecting, and sometimes we show that in our speech, so like the chanting, or in our behavior, like when we bow, or the way we relate to these things. And in the monastic training, there's many things we do that reflect that and encourage these qualities of mind. So like every time you come into the Dhamma hall, you bow to a statue, and you might say, well, the Buddha's not there, why do you need to bow? Well, it's a voluntary thing, that's the first thing. You don't have to, nobody makes you. But you do it if you see the value of bowing, because it makes you mindful of where you are, what you're doing. Ajahn Chah used to say, if you bow with true mindfulness and recollecting the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha, it might even bring tears to your eyes. Tears of spiritual release, of rapture, or just recognizing, valuing the Buddha. Sometimes you recognize the great debt of gratitude you have to the Buddha, because with no Buddha we wouldn't have the Dhamma, the Sangha, we wouldn't have this pathway to practice. So, there's many things that we do that are just pointing us back to the value and the respect for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Of course, it's also, we would say, negative karma to disrespect Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, because the Buddha is an enlightened being, so the mind is totally pure, no greed, anger and delusion. The Sangha, the noble ones, are enlightened or close to enlightenment. They have little or no greed, anger and delusion. So then to disrespect through body, speech or mind, or harm even through body, speech or mind, is negative karma, and you don't want to do that, because it's like putting obstacles in front of your own spiritual progress. And there's lots of stories of, say, in the time of the Buddha, of people who were very aggressive, rude, disrespectful, or argumentative towards the Buddha or some enlightened teacher, and came back on them. And people, sometimes they go downhill in their practice because they have harboured a lot of grudge against that which is very pure or very valuable to us, but then your mind turns on that through delusion, and then they start to suffer. Sometimes it can be quite sort of extraordinary. I remember one Buddhist nun, she, as soon as she ordained, the lady became a Buddhist nun, she shaved her head, put on the robes, went through a ceremony, and then within a few weeks she came out in these terrible blotchy sores all over her face, quite extreme. And she had to go to hospital, and it was painful, pussy kind of wounds, sores. And they took 3 months, the whole rain season, the whole rainy retreat that we go into, to clear up, to heal. And the teacher said to her, "Oh, you know why you've got this terrible, sore, this affliction? Why did this come up?" She didn't know. He said, because in a previous life you had had a Buddha statue, and you, at one point, you were so angry because you were fighting with your own attachments and your greed, anger, attachment to people, money, whatever it was. And instead of practicing patience, developing mindfulness, seeing attachment as the cause of suffering and letting it go, you turned back against the Buddha, the Dhamma, Sangha, and we're blaming the Buddha. You know, why did the Buddha teach about attachment? Why do we have to let go of attachment? You know, sometimes the ego and the sense of self comes up so strong. So in a fit of rage, she picked up a Buddha statue and she smashed it down and broke the head. And the teacher said, this is the karma coming back to you, you know, these terrible sores. Even though she was doing something good in this life, she's become a nun and keeping precepts and meditating and practicing well, the karma had come through from a past life. And there's a lot of those kind of stories that you meet with if you're practicing, especially in the Sangha. You know, things seem to come back on people when they're disrespectful, and then when people have faith, you know, they're worried that they may make karma. So these things like the chanting and the recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha is just that mindfulness to stop you making negative karma. Remember another story, there's a teacher called Lumpur Wan, Ajahn Wan, who's a disciple of Lumpur Man. This is back in the 1970s when he was living in northeast Thailand in the forest, and in those days there was a communist insurgency, there was a war in Vietnam and Laos, and even in Thailand there were communists around fighting the government. And in his area of his forest monastery, there were communists around, so there were lots of army checkpoints and roadblocks, and anyone walking around at night might get shot at because they were usually considered to be an insurgent coming to do something, attack, or to be a terrorist or something. And the monks had to go, Lumpur Wan and his monks had to go into a village one night to chant for a funeral. Somebody had died, and the custom is the monks are invited, they chant and give a Dhamma teaching because somebody's passed away, maybe the coffin is right there in the house, and they'll chant over it and give some Dhamma teaching. And then they walk back to the monastery. In those days you walked everywhere, you walked into the village and back, maybe a couple of kilometers from the village out to the forest monastery along a dirt road. And this dirt road had an army roadblock on it, and before they left the house, Lumpur Wan told his monks, just walk single file behind me, leave a bit of space between each monk, which is actually how the Buddha taught monks to walk. He said, leave the distance of a plough between each monk, so that's maybe 1.5 meters. Walk in single file along the road, and whatever happens, don't move, don't get agitated or disturbed, just keep walking behind me. This is a sort of a story, a legendary story of Lumpur Wan. So they're walking along the track in the dark, and out of the darkness somebody shouted at them, "Who are you?" kind of thing, and then started firing, shooting at the monks. And the monks just kept walking. Lumpur Wan just said, just keep walking. And they kept walking, and eventually they were out of range. The shot stopped, and they went back into the monastery, and everyone was fine, no one was hurt. And the next day, the local army captain and soldiers came in a jeep to the monastery, and they were so apologetic because they had found out they had shot at the monks in mistake, thinking they were insurgents. And they came into the monastery and they bowed and they saying, Lumpur, please forgive us. We were just doing our duty. We had no disrespect for you, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Please, can you bless us, and please, can you forgive us so that we don't make bad karma for the future? You know, shooting at monks. We had no knowledge that you were monks, and we had no intention to hurt monks. They were really worried that they'd make bad karma. And there's many of those kind of incidents where people are afraid that they've made bad karma by being disrespectful or doing something. If you live in or go to Thailand, say, you'll see that people are very respectful of monks because they don't want to make bad karma. And it's not so much a personal thing, partly it's just, they respect the robes, the renunciation of the monk. Whether they know them or not, or like them or not, is a different matter. It's more the respect for the form, the robes, the precepts, or the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, you could say. So this is why we chant, asking forgiveness from Buddha Dhamma Sangha. It sets up the right mindset for learning the Dhamma and progressing in the practice. Another question. Ajahn, how can we have asubha-nimita happen? How can we have asubha-nimita happen? Well, asubha means unbeautiful. Nimitta means vision or meditative vision or sound or smell, taste, touch. Any of the senses can bring up a vision that may arise or a sensation that may arise in meditation. So asubha-nimita means an image, or usually refers to an image of a body part of the body, particularly in its unattractive light. So the skeleton, the blood, the bones, the flesh or the organs, whatever. Or it could mean a corpse, a vision of a corpse perhaps, and so on. So for newcomers to meditation, generally one has to practice this. One reads books, one relies on visual images that one's seen either from books, photographs, movies, or even going to see a corpse, say somewhere like in a mortuary or in a graveyard. Or imagination can also be used. And one is reflecting or contemplating the body, particularly the unattractive aspect of the human body, to counter our basic sensual desire, sexual desire, lust for our body, for the body of others, and those kinds of desires and attachment. One is countering them by cultivating the perception of the opposite, so the unattractive. So one may take each individual body part, going through them and then visualizing them and holding attention on the visual image. So one creates those images or uses memory of past images that one's seen and brings them up and then focuses on them. So people who've worked in healthcare, like doctors and nurses, have an advantage here. They often have a lot of information in their memory that they could bring up to develop these images. Monks, we often say in an Asian country, you might actually be invited to go and see an autopsy, and you get a lot of images from that. A few people may have spontaneously arising images. So, the famous one in the time of the Buddha, one of the first disciples ever of the Buddha was Yasa, who was the son of a wealthy family, like a young rich boy, always partying, always got good clothes, girls, good food, music, all the sort of things that a young party addict would have. But he was getting very bored with it all. And one night he was feeling really kind of so tired of this party scene and the fun and the frivolity and the superficiality of it all. And he actually fell asleep, and then he woke up and everyone had gone to sleep. The party had broken up and everyone was sleeping there. And he said, some of the girls, their hair is all disarray, they're dribbling, they look very kind of ugly, maybe the makeup is smeared. The men are just lying there drunken, kind of mumbling and snoring, and the whole scene looked very kind of unpleasant, and he had this sort of sense of revulsion for even what is normally considered as fun, attractive. So he went wandering off and found the Buddha. And he had some very clear images of the ugliness of the human body, he even saw these people as like corpses. People who normally dress very well and look very nice appeared to him as corpses. And apparently this was the spontaneous images arising from previous life where he had, as an act of charity, he formed a little group of people who would go around collecting dead bodies that had no families or relatives and hadn't had funerals, and they would give them funerals and bury them properly or cremate them properly. So he was very familiar in that life with dead bodies. And then in this life, as the Dhamma was arising, he got tired of the world, was thinking of the spiritual life. He had these spontaneous images arise. In the modern day and age, many, particularly Sangha members, but occasionally lay people as well, have spontaneous asupa images arise. Famous one is the nun, Mechi Gyal, the student of Luang Por Man who became enlightened. She, at the age of 16, the very first time she started meditating, she stayed up all night meditating and had very clear images of her as a corpse. They just arose spontaneously from the peaceful mind. So these kind of images are often a fusion between samatha and vipassana, calm and insight, and it's often maybe a sign that somebody has meditated before in the past. Sometimes it's from this life. So sometimes you have to create them, sometimes they arise by themselves. Ajahn Chah used to tell the monks, you have to practice your developing your asupa perception of the unattractiveness of the body until you can see your fellow monks as corpses or skeletons. As you're walking along the road on alms round, you see your fellow monks as just skeletons walking along the road and the bones clicking together. So this obviously does sound a bit unusual in this day and age. Who would do that? But for those who meditate, after a while you probably understand why. It's developing your perception of the impermanence of the body, helping you to let go of attachment and identification with the body. Next question. I can think or understand how every material thing breaks up into elements, but I cannot visualize either my own or other people's bodies being decomposed. How to have this kind of nimitta? Well, carrying on from what I was just saying, you have to create those nimittas using your imagination, maybe get some external stimulus from looking at pictures. You can get these images on the internet or just using observation of people, of yourself, going through the parts of the body, looking at the unattractive aspects. Occasionally we go to a funeral and maybe see a friend or relative who's died and just look at the body. Sometimes they give you the viewing of the body. In the forest we are always noticing corpses, birds, animals, kangaroos, deer, they die, and sometimes you come across the corpse and so on. You first of all get the information, and then you have to focus your mind on it, bring the image up again with mindfulness and develop it as a meditation object. And if you can't do it yet, we'll just work at it in a more gentle way. Or maybe you can't see yourself as a corpse yet, but maybe you can just run through the 32 parts of the body, just visualizing each part, also thinking about them, what each part does, the function, what they look like, where they are in the body, maybe that's a step towards actually visualizing yourself as a corpse. And you can also do it just as a simple exercise, intellectual exercise first. You think, well, when I die, what will happen? I'll stop breathing. I'll probably be lying there on a bed perhaps. The breath stops. The body goes still. The heat leaves the body, so the body becomes cold. The color of the skin changes very quickly, because once the heat leaves the body, the breath stops. The cells freeze, as it were. They stop working, they stop living. So then you become pale at first, and immediately there's a change in the body, the temperature. It becomes stiff, rigor mortis, and all of that. And nowadays, as far as I can tell, there's lots of movies, TV shows, information on the internet that you can read up on and just get the idea of what happens when you die. And then you're now internalizing it just as a way to prepare yourself for the truth. This is what happens to you, and of course to other people as well. Helping to your mind to adjust to the impermanence of life. And literally seeing that this body eventually will stop working and it will start to decompose. And if you don't have a cremation or a burial, well, if you just left the body there, just like the deer or the kangaroos, well, it'll go through stages of decomposition, which you can imagine, think of. And the idea is you're teaching yourself to see this body is impermanent. Ultimately, it's not self. Because if it was self, you wouldn't want this to happen to it. You wouldn't want it to die and decompose and go back to the elements. But it does. And here we've seen many corpses of kangaroos and deer that are complete and look like they're just sleeping. The first day when they die, you see it looks like it's just a nice sweet little kangaroo or deer sleeping, but it's dead. But very quickly it changes, and the hair drops off, and birds come and peck it, and foxes come and pull it apart, and wild dogs and other animals pull it apart, and the birds keep going, and then the insects come and you get maggots. And over a period of weeks, or even occasionally months, but usually weeks, you see this body that was once looking quite good gradually break apart until it's just bones with a little bit of skin and flesh, and then eventually it completely disappears, and all you've got left is earth. And over the years I've done that many times, contemplate that. And a human being would be the same. You bury a human being, eventually you might just have a few bones left, but it becomes earth, doesn't it? It goes back to the elements. So first of all, you think it through. Visualize it if you can, think it through, read the book, read on the internet, until your mind becomes more calm. And when you're in a good state, a good place, maybe you can really visualize it and see it quite clearly. Then you also notice that about other people as well as yourself, and maybe it changes your view about human beings. And one thing you notice more is if you see the impermanence of the body, you notice the mind more. The mind becomes more important, and you realize the mind is what lasts or continues after death. The body is something that goes back to the elements. So you start to understand this separation between mind and body. But it's a difficult practice, I agree, so you have to go slowly, gently, and just keep going, and you might find it can help you. Another question. Can we compare the benefits of keeping the 5 precepts versus the 8 precepts? i.e., is there a score of 60 or 80, etc.? How to maximize one's life as a blessing? Well, if it helps, you can think of it like that as a game. You get more points if you keep the 8 precepts. So the monks here keeping 227 precepts, they're going to be right at the top of the game. But obviously that's a little bit trivial. The purpose is precepts are rules of discipline or guidelines that help train you. They're training rules, a training to be done. So when you take the 5 or the 8 precepts, we say panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Panatipata, living beings. Veramani, refrain from harming living beings. Sikkhapadang, I undertake this training rule. Samadhiyami, I undertake. So similar to the word samadhi. So undertaking means you're setting your mind to be firm in this practice, undertaking to not kill or harm living beings. And the precepts are like that, 5, 8, or really the monks' rules are the same. You undertake voluntarily, nobody forces you to do this, but when you see the value of training yourself in this way, to abandon ill will, aggression, hatred, and cultivate kindness, compassion, you take on these kind of precepts and you make your mind firm in following the precept. So you might remind yourself frequently, I keep this precept, until it's just automatically in your thinking, in the mind, you automatically will refrain from deliberately, intentionally hurting or killing even an ant. So if you unwittingly, unknowingly kill an ant, okay, you have to accept that. Sometimes it happens, but you wouldn't knowingly or deliberately kill or hurt a living being. That's the aim. So you're removing the intention to kill from your psyche, from your mind, until it's gone. Through that precept, you can do that by practicing mindfulness, awareness, and following it until the intention is removed. And the same with stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and so on. The 8 precepts involve more renunciation, specifically to help develop meditation, developing samadhi, because samadhi is a form of renunciation, and we need some heightened discipline if you want to develop one-pointedness of mind, samadhi, jhana. The 8 precepts are directly supporting that, simplifying your mind, your life, your activities, avoiding unnecessary extra activities like entertainments, music, sports, makeup, jewelry, and so on. So you're just streamlining your practice. You don't eat in the evening, so you eat in the morning, and then in the evening your body is very light. So it requires more effort. So you may say more barami or more goodness is developed, more good karma is developed from the 8 precepts more than the 5 precepts, and then the Vinaya of bhikkhus, monks and nuns is even more renunciation, requires more effort, so you could say more good karma is made. But that's not to look down on the 5 precepts. The 5 precepts are a vehicle that will bring you to the noble path, stream entry, and all the other precepts actually come out of the 5 precepts. They're the sort of central core of morality, ethical living, and training the mind to abandon defilement. They lie at the core. So, if you're ready, take on the 8 precepts or ordain, if you're ready. If you're not ready, well, carry on with the 5 precepts. One thing you have to be aware of, if you take on 8 precepts or ordain as a monk or a nun, if you're not ready for it, the renunciation is not there, the willingness to train, the willingness to commit is not there. When you try taking on those precepts, you can get a reaction. So people get angry or anxious or become unhappy inside if they're not really sincere in their commitment, and that's not good. So if you find 8 precepts too difficult, well, keep the 5 precepts, that's fine. Work with them, use them as guidelines. What you don't really want to do is go lower than the 5. Some people go down to 4. They like their evening wine or beer or whatever. Well, be careful, because the reason we give up drinking, taking drugs, is because we're under the influence. We tend to break the other precepts as well. Our mindfulness goes downhill. Or some people, they have trouble with one or more of the precepts, so they sort of reduce the number of precepts down. Well, one precept is better than none, but 5 is really good, so aim for 5 first. Last question. Oh, it's quite long. It seems to be like an essay. Dear Venerable Luang Por Kalyano, since I started listening to your Dhamma teachings, there has not been a single question or doubt in my mind that hasn't been answered by you through other listeners' questions right at the moment that I needed it the most. It has been one of the greatest blessings in my present life. Sometimes I feel that this phenomena isn't fortuitous, that it is not random, but the result of good karma, or just the answer to my most profound prayers. For this reason, I believe that many others like me are going through the same experience. For this reason, I've decided to open my heart to you and make the following question. Since I was a child, just a few years old, I can remember close relatives calling me out on my tendency to lie and mislead them, hiding my misdeeds as I grew up. This tendency has become embedded as a horrible bad habit, permeating all aspects of my life and destroying my personal and business reputation as someone that can be trusted. The pain that this bad habit has created is reaping its results in full light this present moment, and it has been your Dhamma teachings that have helped me to go through this with right understanding and equanimity without losing my head. What I can't understand is why of all the 5 precepts, false speech is the only one I break, even when trying to be mindful of it. I believe I have strong faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and why, after realizing the deepness of this fault, I can't get it under control and it continues to bring deep shame to myself every time, knowing that I failed to keep this precept. Please advise me. This is something that is driving me to a point of being completely dysfunctional. And I have been developing aversion towards myself, being deeply depressed and remorseful. Sorry, Luang Por, for such a long story, but I am struggling with this. It is the greatest obstacle to my Dhamma practice, because it doesn't allow me to progress and establish a moral and honourable way of living. Well, you actually seem to have a good insight into your own practice of ethics, precepts and spiritual development, and that's a really good start. Know what the problem is, because a lot of people don't even get that far. They have all these problems and they're not aware what they are and where they've come from and why and so on. But you do seem to have a good insight, that means there's a chance for improvement and progress for sure, because you have an understanding what the problem is. And you're right, a lot of these things begin when we're kids. We all probably have told lies and insulted others and said the wrong thing when we were kids, some more than others. But the idea, one thing to be aware of, which you seem to be aware of, I think, is as you get older, the consequences become heavier, and repeated lying, well, it becomes a more ingrained habit that's harder to change, and the consequences often are heavier because it affects relationships, work, like you say, it damages your reputation. And that is one of the main karmic consequences of lying or false speech, is that other people witness it, get to know it, they can't trust you anymore. And so it will affect business, relationships, friendships. So that's where you get your motivation to start being more disciplined and more careful. When you see the harm that comes from it, you have to sit down and have the conversation with yourself and say, I don't want to do this anymore because I see the harm. And you have to develop a really strong determination to change. So that means you have to reflect back on your speech. I would say every day as part of your practice, not necessarily as a meditation, but just as a reflective practice, ask yourself from morning till night, what did I say today? Did I lie? Try and remember every single conversation you had, with who, about what you said, what they said, the general substance of each conversation, and ask yourself, did I lie then? And there's grades of lying. There's outright falsehoods, there's misleading speech, there's exaggerations, there's a variety of ways we deceive and lie. So be honest with yourself. The first thing the Buddha taught to his own son, Rahula, was not to lie, because he said it's so important if you really want to progress in training your mind to abandon the mental defilements of greed, anger, delusion. You have to develop the love of truth, and the whole of the Buddhist path and practice is called the Four Noble Truths, Ariya Satya Dhamma, or the Dhamma itself is the truth. So obviously lying is not the truth, it's going away from the truth. So it's something you have to get a grip on. And you can only do that by developing a strong determination, I'm going to stop lying. And then you keep putting it into practice over and over again. And if you do this reviewing of your speech through every day, maybe at the end of the day, maybe at the beginning of the day you make your determination, today I will keep the 5 precepts, I won't lie. At the end of the day you review whether you actually kept the precepts. This over time will make you more and more mindful of your speech, because if you get into the habit of reviewing your speech at the end of the day and assessing, monitoring what you've said, and if you pick out, oh, I did lie to that person at that time, that was not right, I don't like that, I'm not happy with that. You keep doing that, then sooner or later, as you're in a situation where you're tempted to lie, the alarm bells will start going off before you say the lie. You may have the thought first, I'm going to tell a lie, but then you're stopping yourself, because later you're going to regret it, and you'll be reviewing this, there's no point lying because I'm going to be caught out later when I review this. So eventually you get to the point where you may be going to lie, but you stop yourself. And then you've got a little victory, and you build on that, and it becomes stronger, and you become more disciplined and more mindful, to the point where you just start giving up lying as a way of speaking, and you no longer do it. Gradually or quickly you get to that point. So you have to keep reminding yourself of the regret, the consequences, the bad reputation, other people don't like it, you don't like yourself. Bringing that up to the forefront of your thinking to give you the energy and the discipline to not lie, and then keep reviewing your speech every day until you're much more mindful of your speech, and you would rather tell the truth even if it's painful or inconvenient than tell a lie. And that's another part of it, isn't it? We lie often just to get out of trouble. You get some short-term advantage, you get something, or you avoid some pain, some difficulty by lying. But long-term, it doesn't work like that. Long-term, you get regret, you get damaged reputation, people don't trust you. In the long term, it's actually more inconvenient to lie. So you have to change it, turn it around and be clear. I'd rather tell the truth and have a clear conscience and be at ease within myself, even if that truth is inconvenient and difficult, than lie. And you just keep working towards developing a fresh, good habits. And maybe sometimes you blow it and you tell a lie again. It's just like drinking or giving up cigarettes or drink, or swearing or all kinds of bad behavior, you occasionally forget yourself and you blow it and you tell another lie, say, but then you just re-establish your determination not to until you no longer blow it. You are constantly telling the truth. And good things will come of that. And that you focus on that as your goal. The happiness of not lying. You have a clear conscience, you're at ease, you're happy in yourself, other people can't criticize you because you don't lie. All kinds of good things will come from it. So you keep reminding yourself of that, then that will help you get the discipline. And you're following the Buddha. The Buddha said we have to learn not to lie. And one of the impediments or hindrances to progress in the Dhamma is being unable to talk about certain things, keeping too many secrets, say from your teacher or from your confidant or other people. If you're always kind of being sneaky and hiding things and lying, then it's hard to clean out your mind from the mental defilements. So sometimes it's good to open up to a trusted friend, either a teacher or a trusted Dhamma friend. Open up if you have done something wrong, bad, the sort of thing that would make you lie. You actually tell someone who you can trust, who's not going to use it against you, as a way of teaching yourself to be honest. So there's a few things you can develop to help you, but develop this love of truth, and ultimately you get to the point where you would rather tell the truth if you have to. I mean, you don't always have to tell the truth in the sense. Just staying quiet in certain situations is not lying, so sometimes you just stay quiet, that's okay. But if you need to tell the truth in a situation and you're reluctant to, but it comes up, we'll just tell the truth if it's necessary and see that the lie is more painful than the truth. Anyway, that's the last of the questions tonight, so we'll leave it there and wish you all well in your Dhamma practice.